The theme I had for this month's TBR was unfinished books. Basically just books that I had started at some point in my life and never actually got to the end of. There wasn't any other like special qualification that the books had to go through. Over the month I've done reviews for various things that I've read, and if I have already done a review, then I'll just do a quick recap of it and put the link to the review in the description below. And if I haven't, then I will review it in this video. And at the end, I will wrap up with any like closing thoughts. So, the first book on my TBR was Darker Still, written by Leanna Renee Hieber. This is a YA paranormal romance about a mute girl who falls in love with the painting, and there's a lot of dark magic floating about. This was one of the books I reviewed already, so there will be a link below. The second book on my TBR was Artemis, Fowl, The Last Guardian, which is the last book in the Artemis Fowl series. Again, I reviewed this book already, so there will be a link to that review below. I also reviewed the other 7 books in an episode, so I will also link that below. But basically, this is Artemis's last great adventure, and I thought this was a spectacular adventure. Definitely worth reading, although I would recommend you read the other books before you get up to the 8th book if you haven't already. The third book that I finished off my TBR was Alara, Unbroken by Beyer. This is a Magic the Gathering novel, and I love this book, but having said that, I can't really recommend it to anyone who hasn't played Magic the Gathering. I started playing Magic in June of 2002, so I've been playing Magic for a while. So the concepts and the lore and the creature types and all of that stuff isn't new to me, so I didn't need an explanation. But one of the things I did while reading was like see if someone who had never read this book would need an explanation, and there were some things that you would need an explanation on. There's an assumption that when you read this book, you're already familiar with the card game. One of the things I really liked about this book was the chapters were really short. One of the things I liked about this book was that the chapters were really short, like 3 or 4 pages long. So it was really easy for me to like read 20 or 30 pages because I'd be like, oh yeah, I can commit to another 3 pages. Yeah, I can commit to another 3 pages. 4 pages, no problem. As opposed to like one 20-page section where I'm like, do I really have the time to read these next 20 pages? When writing this, Beyer had to know where the really good parts were, because each chapter is broken up by each chapter is distinguished by the location at which it takes place. If something interesting was happening on, say, Bant, it'd be like, Bant. Next chapter, Grixis. Next chapter, back to Bant. Next chapter, Naya. Next chapter, back to Bant. Because we know the interesting stuff is happening on Bant, but you have to know what's going on in the other planes. So then as soon as like the interesting things on one plane stopped, then they started picking up on the other planes, and the pacing of this novel was just fabulous. There are 4 planeswalkers in this book. There's Nicol Bolas, Elspeth, Ajani, and Sarkin. Other characters come and go throughout the book. Alara is a world that is broken up into 5 continents that you can't reach because they've all become their own little individual worlds. And only planeswalkers have the ability to walk between these worlds, more or less, travel between them. And basically, Nicol Bolas' scheme is to rejoin these 5 worlds. And if you're familiar with the colors of Magic, each world has a specific color that is the dominant color in it. Grixis is black, Esper is blue, Bant is white, Naya is green, and Jund is red. And the last book of my TBR was Shiva's Fire by Suzanne Fisher Staples. Like I said in my TBR, this was a book I actually had book guilt about because I bought it in like 4th grade and I haven't read it, so I've had this book for almost 12 years without reading. So for about the first 100 pages of this book, every time I came across an Indian term, I had to look it up. I was like iPod searching. Then I was done reading for the time being, and I wanted to see how long or how many pages in the back of the book there were before the actual end of the book. And so I flipped to the very last page and I see a bunch of words and definitions. So I flip back a few more pages and discover there's a glossary. Basically, the main character, Parvati, was born on a day of a giant flood slash cyclone slash monsoon hitting her village. They've called it all three, so I don't know exactly which one it was. And so people are all like, oh, it's Parvati's fault. This cyclone hit us. She's cursed, blah, blah, blah. It's her fault. It's her fault that the Yuvaraja has gotten sick. The Yuvaraja is like the prince. And it's her fault that all these children are dying, and she's a horrible person, and it really draws on the fantastical elements because Parvati has been living in a conscious state since the moment she was born. Parvati becomes obsessed with this doll of the god Shiva, and every night she sees him dancing, and so in the day she tries to mimic her abilities. So one day, she jumps into a fire and dances in the fire, and her mother freaks out. She's like, you could have been hurt, and when she pulls Parvati out, Parvati doesn't have a scratch on her. And then her mother makes her promise to say she'll never dance again, and so Parvati does her best to follow that right up until a guru comes in and tells her it's her destiny to dance and she needs to come to train as a Devadashi. I will look up the exact definition. A servant of the gods, one entirely devoted to the sacred art of classical dance. And this is what Parvati's always wanted, so she's really happy. And then she meets the evil Raja. And she realizes that she might want other things in life as well. Once Parvati was no longer like the conscious baby observing everything, and she started growing up, the story got really easy to get into. It was such a beautiful look at the culture of Indian culture, particularly that of the Devadashi. I'm saying this, of course, as someone who has never actually studied the culture of India very thoroughly. It's definitely one of the areas in world history that I am lacking. It really is geared toward a more female reader because it does deal with things that happen to a girl when she hits puberty. But having said that, that doesn't take up a lot of the book, and the beauty of the culture that is described and just the diversity of it is amazing, and I would highly recommend this book. Basically, the rule I have is that as long as I read the 4 books on my TBR, I can read whatever else I want during the month. I read 2 books before I actually announced my TBR. The first one was the comic book Star Wars Blood of the Empire. This is the journey of the masterless apprentice Teneb Kel on the Sith side, and his journey to becoming more than a masterless apprentice. The second book was The Rings of Poseidon, which was a story about some archaeologists who discovered a magical ring, who then had to save the world, and I said this book was basically really boring and not worth reading. This link will be with the Star Wars link because they were reviewed in the same video. The other book that I reviewed was The Unusual Suspects by Michael Buckley, which is the second book in the children's series. Like I said, this was a really fun book to read. Now on to some things that I actually haven't reviewed, either because I didn't think they were worthy of an individual review, or because I finished them very recently. I read a 70-page excerpt of Reckless by Cornelia Funke. I can't give this a proper book review because it was only 70 pages, but what I can tell you is while the plot of the story was interesting, the writing felt very rigid and sharp and just didn't draw me in. There's a world beyond the smear that the Reckless brothers own. That is their last name, Reckless. And the older brother disappears to this world quite often, and one day his younger brother follows him, and his younger brother gets attacked by something known as a Goyle, who is actually a stone person, and as a result the younger brother becomes infected, and his skin is slowly turning to stone. At this point, the brother who's turning to stone's girlfriend comes, and there's also a talking fox. This book was actually recommended to me by someone who usually I like the stuff they recommend, but in this case, it felt very stony. I do, however, also have the Inkheart series by her, so if I find I do like that, I will probably check out Reckless, but if I don't like the Inkheart series, then I probably won't like this story. But if you have read Reckless and you really like it, let me know in the comments. Also, I read another graphic novel, and that is the 7th manga in the Naruto saga. This is Orochimaru's Curse. This starts with Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji fighting the Sound Ninja as Naruto and Sasuke are unconscious. Lee has been pummeled and Sakura is extremely beat up. There is how Gaara's team makes it to the tower. There's a little bit of Hinata, Kiba, and Shino. And it ends with Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura arriving at the Chunin exam tower. All in all, nothing in this particular volume was diverged from the anime. It was pretty much the same. And the book I will close out February with, because I just finished it while I was dumping the last footage, was Beyond Religion, Ethics for a Whole World, written by the Dalai Lama. Basically what this book is an argument on why ethics should be and can be secular as opposed to based in religion. And looking at just like the common traits of humanity, and it looks at both an individual and a global scale. It was only about 128 pages on my Nook. It was a really quick read, even though it took me about 12 days to read, because I was only reading a chapter a day because I really wanted to think about the things that were being said in each chapter. I find it really hard for me to like review books like this because, like, what am I gonna say? The writing style was terrible. It wasn't. It was quite good. I was quite interested in the book the entire time I was reading it. Like, what? The plot is terrible? No, the purpose of the book is quite an important one, and it's quite well executed. And until tomorrow, TTYL.